AWS IoT Greengrass Introduction and Tutorial. Greengrass extends AWS cloud capabilities to your local premises, for example, a factory. Let's look at its key building blocks. At a high level, there are three key entities: Greengrass Cloud Service, Greengrass Core, and IoT clients or devices. Greengrass Cloud Service allows you to configure and manage the overall Greengrass setup and deployment. The Greengrass core device could be an on-premise Windows or a Linux machine. For example, it could be a Raspberry Pi. The core device runs the Greengrass core software, which you must download and install. Once the Greengrass core device is set up and is running, it can communicate with various AWS cloud services. The IoT client devices can communicate and send their data to the on-premise Greengrass core device over the local network. Therefore, even when internet services are unavailable and therefore AWS cloud cannot be reached, the local IoT client devices and Greengrass core can continue to function normally. Greengrass Cloud Service is used to configure and manage the Greengrass core devices remotely. So if you want to deploy a component on a Greengrass core device, you create a deployment in the Greengrass Cloud Service and it will deploy it to the on-premise Greengrass core device remotely. The Greengrass core device exists outside the AWS cloud. For example, in the factory premises, core devices are modeled as things in AWS cloud and their status can be seen in AWS Greengrass Cloud Console. The minimal Greengrass core software is called Nucleus and it is a Java program. It manages other software modules called components which run on the core device. AWS provides several pre-built components and in addition you can write one of your own. It is the components that do all the work on the core device. For example, MQTT broker component manages messages to and from client devices. MQTT bridge component sends messages to AWS IoT core. You can configure and deploy newer versions of components remotely via AWS Greengrass Cloud Service. The Greengrass client IoT devices are also modeled as things. These devices may use AWS IoT Device SDK to communicate with Greengrass core. For example, to send and receive messages over MQTT. MQTT is not the only protocol for communication. Other protocols like Modbus or OPC UA may be used too, in which case appropriate protocol conversion component must be deployed on Greengrass core device. Okay, now that we understand the key AWS Greengrass entities, let us look at components in more detail. Components represent software modules that are managed by Greengrass core. You can define dependencies between them. That means if a component is deployed, other components it depends on are also deployed. Greengrass provides us with many pre-built components. Here are a few of them. Greengrass Nucleus. This is a mandatory component, minimum requirement to run AWS IoT Greengrass core software on a device. Greengrass CLI, local command line interface that you can use on core devices to develop debug components locally. MQTT broker. It handles MQTT messages between client devices and Greengrass core. MQTT bridge relays MQTT messages between Greengrass core and AWS IoT core. Stream manager enables you to process data streams to transfer to the AWS cloud from Greengrass core devices, and so on. Components belong to one of the following types. Nucleus. This provides minimum functionality of AWS IoT Greengrass core software. Plugin. Greengrass Nucleus runs a plugin component in the same JVM as the Nucleus. Therefore, they can interface directly with Greengrass Nucleus. Generic. This is the default type for custom components. Greengrass Nucleus runs a generic component's lifecycle scripts if the component defines a lifecycle. Lambda. A component has this type when you create the component from a Lambda function. What is a component made of? It has a recipe file written in JSON or YAML where configuration parameters, component dependencies, lifecycle, platform compatibility, etc. are defined. And there are artifacts, which are component libraries, scripts, compiled code, static resources, and so on. So if you create a custom component, you will need to create a recipe and artifacts. How do devices communicate with Greengrass core? In the setup you see, Greengrass core device runs MQTT broker component. So client devices can send MQTT messages to Greengrass core MQTT broker. However, if the client device uses OPC UA or Modbus protocol for communication, then a protocol adapter component is needed for this. And the MQTT bridge component can send messages from Greengrass core device to AWS IoT core. Now it's time for a demo. This is a simplified diagram for our tutorial. We will set up a Greengrass core device with necessary components on it. Next, we will set up a client device and send messages from it to the core device. The core device will forward those messages to AWS IoT core. Here's a more detailed diagram of the same. You can see various components deployed on Greengrass core. Let's begin by setting up the Greengrass core device. We are in AWS IoT console and under Manage Greengrass Devices, select core device, hit Setup a core device. Let's provide a name. We will call that GG core device, and we will not have a thing group for that, and our operating system will be Linux, and we will be configuring AWS credentials on the device later. And to set this up, we have to download the installer and finally run the installer. In AWS IAM, I've created a user called gg_user and provided permissions. You should ideally provide more restrictive permissions. For the sake of the demo, our permissions are really permissive, and also created access keys and noted them down. Now, your Greengrass core device should have Java runtime installed. So I'm using my laptop with Linux operating system as my Greengrass core device. So first, let's export AWS access key ID and AWS secret access key. So once that is done, let's copy the command for downloading the installer. Okay, and we will wait for the installer to be downloaded. Okay, now next we are ready to run the installer. So let's copy that command, paste it here, and run the installer. Okay, as you can see, this is a Java program. All right. And the installation is complete, and we are going to run our Nucleus service manually. Okay, so it's not set up as a system service here. Okay, now we can go to AWS IoT console, and under things, we can see the GG core device. This is the device we created earlier. Now let's go to Greengrass devices, core devices section. However, we do not see the device here. This is simply because the Nucleus software is not yet running on the Greengrass core device. And under deployments, we can see there is a deployment with component AWS Greengrass CLI, and this is ready to be deployed on the Greengrass core device. Okay, now in our Greengrass core device, let's look for the Greengrass v2 installation, right? So that's installed under /greengrass/v2, right? So that's the path to it. And in order to run the Nucleus software, right, we must find the loader file we will use to run the Nucleus software. That's found under alts, okay, and current, alts current, distro, bin, and there should be a loader file there. Okay, so that's what we will use to run our Nucleus. We are ready to run Nucleus now. So let's do that. We'll run that command, and there we can see launched Nucleus successfully. Okay, now we can go to AWS IoT console, and under core devices, we can see this core device showing up with a status healthy. Okay, so let's click on the device name and go inside and take a look. So amongst the components, we can see the Nucleus and the CLI component, right? So our core device is running as expected. Okay, on a Greengrass core device, let us look at the Greengrass CLI component that was deployed, right? So let's run that and see. So under Greengrass v2 bin directory, you can see that there is a Greengrass CLI file, right? So let's run that and provide some arguments for component list. So we want to look at the list of components installed on this Greengrass v2 installation. And here you can see the list of components that are there and their status, right? Similarly, if you want component details of a particular component, right, you can provide it as an appropriate argument. And here you can see the details of the Greengrass nucleus component, right? Or you can just simply type help to find various commands. Okay, and what about the logs? So under Greengrass v2, there's a logs directory. So let's look at what is there inside it. Right here you can see various log files here. The primary log file that you will be interested in is probably greengrass.log. So you can tail that log file to see the logs as they are generated. Now that Greengrass core has been set up, let's deploy necessary components on it. Okay, so for a core device, GG core device, let's go to the deployment section, right, and choose the deployment. And here we will add more components to be deployed. Okay, so go to actions and revise the deployment. Let's choose that revise deployment. Okay, so hit next, and now we will choose the components to deploy. Okay, so we'll choose the MQTT bridge. All right, so let's see what else we want to deploy for our demo. Okay, hit okay, next, and let's select that IP detector and the MQTT broker. That's the MQTT broker. Okay, and the auth component. All right, so I think we need these components, and that's it. Okay, so now we are ready to hit next. Okay, so those are the components that will be deployed. All right, then hit next. Okay, review and deploy. Okay, so now we can see the deployment status as active. And now the deployment status changes to completed. And now if you go to our core device and under components, you can see all those new components. All right. Let's set up IoT client device now. Now let us create our client IoT device. So under things, choose create thing, create a single thing, hit next, provide a thing name. We'll just call it device 1. Okay. Leave all that as default, hit next, and auto generate new certificate, hit next. Under policies, choose those two policies. Okay, then hit create thing. Okay, so here now you can download the certificates. So you must download the device certificate, the public and private key file, the root CA certificate, and when you've done that, you can hit the done button. All right. Remember that for client IoT device to successfully communicate with Greengrass core, it should have X509 certificate, corresponding private key, and root CA certificate. We will see how to use them later in the demo. Okay, let's go to settings section, and here we will attach a Greengrass service role. Now Greengrass works with many AWS services, so in order to access or invoke those services, it needs an appropriate role with suitable permissions. So I'll go to AWS IAM, and there I have already created a role called GG_role with fairly permissive permissions. Okay, ideally you should make them restrictive. Okay, so this particular role we will attach. Now Here we are back to the service role section, and here hit attach role. Select the role we have created. Select attach role. Now let us go to our core device and associate our client device with it. Okay, so we go to the client devices section. There you can see the MQTT broker endpoint also. Remember, we had installed MQTT broker component. And now under associated client devices, let's hit associate client device and give the client device name. Right? Remember that for a client device to be able to successfully talk to the core device, it must be associated to it. Next, we need to set up cloud discovery and configure components. Client devices get connectivity information for the core devices it can connect to from AWS IoT Greengrass service. So for that, we must configure cloud discovery. So when we hit the cloud discovery button, it takes us to the screen and where we can see the associated client devices, and we can also see the list of components which we can configure. Okay, so let's configure the auth component. Here we can define authorization for these components. So let's add this JSON to the configuration to merge, and it says that if the thing name starts with device, allow it to perform MQTT related operations. Hit confirm. Next, we can configure the MQTT bridge component. This component helps us send messages from the core device to IoT core. Okay, so here under configuration to merge, let's add JSON where we describe that any messages coming to a particular topic should be sent to the IoT core. Okay, so once we are done, let's review and deploy. Okay, final review and then hit the deploy button. All right, so now the deployment status is active. Let's wait for it to complete. Okay, now it's completed. So that means all our changes have been deployed to the core device. Now we can proceed to install AWS IoT Device SDK for Python on the client device. Let us set up our IoT client device. Typically, this would be another machine, but I'm using my laptop with Linux operating system. And here are the certificates and keys that we downloaded earlier for this particular thing. Okay, now we'll git clone AWS IoT Device SDK for Python. Okay, so once that is done, we are ready to install it. Okay, that's the download. Okay, now let us install it. So that's the pip install command. Okay, and let's wait for the installation to complete. Okay, so we have successfully installed AWS IoT SDK. Now, inside the AWS IoT Device SDK Python v2 directory, there is a samples directory where you will find a basic discovery Python file. So we are going to run this to send and receive messages from the client device to the Greengrass core device. We will run the program now. Okay, let's take a look at the arguments that are being passed. There is a thing name, device 1, and topic, client's device 1 message, and the message itself, and certificates and keys along with region. Okay, now the messages will be sent to Greengrass core device MQTT broker on this particular IP address and port 8883. So the messages are sent and received. So this program publishes and subscribes to the same topic. Time to see if messages are being received at AWS IoT core. These messages should also be received by IoT core. So to check that, we use MQTT test client. Here we will subscribe to the topic and then look for messages being received. Okay, let's go back to the client device, IoT client device, and again run the program to send messages. Okay, as the messages are being sent, we will go back to the MQTT test client and see those messages being received. So here you can see those messages are being received. Okay, so end to end, the IoT client device sends messages to Greengrass core device. There the MQTT broker receives the messages and MQTT bridge forwards those messages to IoT core. Now remember that you can use IoT core message routing rules to send the incoming messages to other AWS services. So with this, we come to the end of our discussion and demo on AWS IoT Greengrass.